afternoon there. This is Michael Cross with another edition of UCY TV's Unlock the Door Radio. And tonight, I say tonight or good afternoon because it depends on what time zone you're listening to us. Anyway, after I've said that, I also have to say, if you want articles that pertain to these subjects and others, please visit my website at michaelcross.net. Anyway, today or tonight or this afternoon or whatever, we have a very special guest. His name's Larry Farris. He's an author and businessman, and he's written a book called The 75 Proven Ways Stay-at-Home Moms Earn Great Income. Okay, this should be very informative as well. Larry, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me. Great to talk to you.
Okay, 75 ways women can stay at home and earn great income. Is this like those pop-ups you get sometimes, or do you go in some detail that's really something that would help people who maybe are thinking, I got kids, maybe I don't want to leave them in daycare?
Sure, no, that's the point. I've been self-employed and working from home for about 20 years, and on Facebook and other social medias, I'm frequently seeing young parents who are asking, hey, is there any way that I can come home or stay home, care for my child, do what I want to do, and still earn decent income? And it touched me. I realized that there was a real need for it. And as I started looking at the other books that were published and the other ideas that were published, most of them were, candidly garbage. They had ideas that, from my business experience, I knew clearly wouldn't work. And one of the worst things for someone who's in a desperate situation is to spend their time and their money chasing something that won't work. And so what I did is I just spent time and put together what I felt confidence in is that someone who didn't have a lot of specialized training, but at the same time period wanted to focus their time on children and home could earn decent, good income with a minimal amount of risk in their business pursuits, and do so. I have things you can do in the country, things you can do in the city, things you can do in the suburbs, and kind of create some ideas and get some ideas and some juice flowing for gals.
Okay, so I take it you definitely feel that there should be a parent at home with young kids, that daycare is probably not the most optimal environment. Larry? Hello? One. Okay, so how do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's really a parent's decision. I'm not trying to make a political statement. I have my own, my own values and such, but there are people who want and need what I'm writing about, and there are other people that have no interest whatsoever, and that's fine. And it's really focused for the people who really want and need solutions, that they're reaching out and they're trying to find a way that they can combine their personal innate desire to spend time with their children, to care for the children, to be the primary care provider, while at the same time period earning enough income to offset. And so, I'm not trying to make it a you should or ought to, and I do get a lot of that. I do get a lot of people like, oh, you just think, but that's not my point.
Okay, so tell me, you've got a situation where a young couple, where they feel that they want to spend more time, at least one of them spend more quality time with their kids. And they come to you or read your book. Of course, most of them can't come to you, but they're going to virtually do it through reading your book. What's some of the tips? What's some of the things they're going to find in your book?
Yeah, and the first thing, what I'm noticing is it's not as common for couples. Here's the challenge. I have a pretty thriving tax practice. It's one of the things that I do in the way I work out of my home. And a good number of my clients are single moms who are not in a relationship and don't have any support from their co-parent. So they're really stuck. I mean, they're in a tough situation because they really can't afford the daycare expense. They're not making enough money in a typical kind of entry level job that's available for a 25 to 30-year-old mom. They're really stuck, and that's one of the first that's one of the first things I have in mind is not the kind of idyllic situation where you've got, husband and wife and a kid, and the husband's got a great job and the wife's just trying to help out. Yeah, that's one part of our society. But there's another part of our society that are single parents, and they're in a tough situation. And so that's really more the focus that I'm trying to write to, is to really reach down to find the person who's in tough financial situations, tough social situations, and still be able to provide some hope and some strategy so they can get out of that struggle that they're into.
Okay, so can you just give us an example of something that someone that has an education, let's say, they have one or two kids, and they are single, that would be maybe an option for them rather than going into the workforce?
So some of the options, and I'm getting signals over here that are telling me that our internet connection is being disrupted, Mike. So I'm only picking up some of what you're saying. But some of the things that I'm excited about, I think if a person has any background at all in mortgage, title, real estate, etc., there's a great business model for serving in that world, and especially doing things like independent mortgage processing. An independent mortgage processor can earn $300 to $500 for every file that is successfully closed. And what you find is that a lot of really good loan officers are the type of people who have sales skills, and they like people, and they want to go out and they want to do things quickly, but they're not very well organized. And so it's just a great pair to have a highly detailed person match up with a salesperson for processing mortgages. And it is a common and well accepted career or small business to operate from your home to support a selling personality in the mortgage industry, and then earn $300 to $500 per file that closes. So if you're closing one or two files a week, and here's the other point, you don't have to work for just one. A processor can probably be processing for 3 to 5 different loan officers at a time, and picking up $300 to $500 per file that they close, working from their home, simply organizing documents they come in, tracking the process, putting a file together that meets certain standards, and then helping to make that file submission to the lenders that the loan officer has selected. It's a great one of the great concepts I like to talk about in my book.
And you go into detail, obviously, for people that might not have a great deal of experience in this area.
Just somewhat. The idea is the purpose of my book is to jog your memory, to give you ideas, to explore paths. And there are, it would be hundreds of pages to flesh too deeply into to each one of the concepts. But it introduces the concept, shows people what the premise is, reminds them, hey, if you've worked in the real estate industry, you remember interfacing with that person that did that? Oh yeah. Well, you ought to be thinking about doing that at your home as well.
Okay, so I've been, you see a lot of stuff in the media now about how the workforce is changing as well when it comes to such things as robotics taking over a lot of jobs get outsourced and so forth. So it seems like a lot of businesses now that they need someone with skills where they actually need a human doing it, that they're contracting out. And that sounds like what you're talking about, these kind of businesses that they don't hire someone because then you have to pay Social Security on them. You need to do this and this and this. You've got all the insurance regulations. America's not a very business-friendly environment anymore. So a lot of them are actually going out and trying to find people that they can hire on a per something basis, where they fix something or they do something. On
performance or production or commission or, a pay for piece, all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. And this is where, a lot of people don't recognize this shift that's moved away from brick and mortar, where everybody kind of, we all do the drive up in your car in masses. We all drive the same cars. We all wear the same suits. 20 years ago, I went to the insurance headquarters of a big insurance company up in Portland, near Portland, Oregon. And I arrived about the same time period as the staff. And, all the staff members were driving the same Chrysler K car. All the men were wearing the same blue suits. All the women were wearing the same blue suit coordinates. It was pretty weird. And I think I was wearing a blazer, so it just stuff like a sore thumb. Well, that era is really gone. This idea of everybody showing up and working in their little cubies, it's gone. The internet and connectivity and communication, it allows us now to work more independently. Now, but there's a lot of small businesses that haven't yet adopted. They haven't yet done that. So it's not that difficult for a mom, and I'm focusing on moms for my book. It's not that difficult for a mom to think about the things she's already done in business in the past, any experience she's already had, and then to approach a few, especially smaller employers, and say, look, you probably have need for a part-time person or a half-time person, but you don't have space, you don't want to take on the overhead. I'd like to help you out. I'd like to do that for you. I'll do it from my home. I'd be glad to drop in a couple days a week to pick up paperwork, deliver things, meet with you for 45 minutes or something. But I want to spend time with my children while at the same time period I can provide a meaningful support service for you. That's a great approach, great pattern for success.
You see, I wouldn't have thought of that myself. I would have thought you go to the big companies and then try to get something. But what you're saying is they probably outsource to Bangladesh or something when it comes to
right. If the bigger companies, if they've considered this, they're going to do it in mass, and there's going to be some huge process to go through. And once they go through that huge process, unfortunately, they're probably going to go someplace where they can find, quote, English speakers, although it's questionable, that they can use, out of country, not just outsourced. And so my direction in my book, I talk a lot about approaching the small business person. And I'm a champion for small business. I don't care to work inside of those big we say so corporate structures. I'm much more comfortable. I think more people are more comfortable interfacing with, companies that have 10, 20, 30 employees.
Mm-hmm. And this is an advantage for the company because, like I said, there's a lot of government taxes they don't have to pay. And, they're probably starting to shift more and more that direction. I mean, it seems like in 10 years, a lot of jobs are going to disappear, like I said, because of robotics. But then you're going to see more. There's still going to be a need for certain jobs to be done. You can't put a mortgage, for instance, into some sort of processor that will automatically fix everything, obviously. You'd agree, right?
I do. You could probably robotize, you could probably develop some software that will take the documents, scan them, and enter them into a software. But what we can't yet robotize is the need for the gathering and collection of those documents and figuring out which one's which. So when you've received a package full of papers, do you have the right papers that go into the computer or not? That's really the human element. I also, I know people are concerned about the replacement of jobs from robotics, but robots need to be maintained, they need to be designed, need to be engineered. I really believe in an expanding economy. And as we gain efficiencies in one sector through robotics, for example, then we're very likely to create entirely new expansions in the economy. The challenge, of course, is that the person who was doing the robotically replaced job, they feel the pinch because they're out of work, but the people that are maintaining and building and designing robots and doing all that, they have a new job. So I think there's a constantly expanding process. In the U.S., it's not so much of a tax burden. The tax burden is small in the United States in comparison to one big animal, and that's regulation. The combined state and federal regulations far exceed the cost of running the governments. They are enormous economic pressures and punitive pressures against small business. Big business in the United States tends to buy up United States senators and congressmen, get legislation passed that promotes certain protective structures for big business, but in the meantime, it makes it very expensive and very difficult for smaller business to function. And so that's really the pain that small business faces is the threat of litigation, which I didn't mention, but the threat of litigation is probably number one. And number two is the cost of regulatory compliance, and number three would be taxation. And so in this area, I think it's really more of an issue of regulatory compliance. And I'll give you one example. If you have a small company, you have no employees, you could have a retirement plan that you run out of your checkbook that it's a self-directed 401k. You could fund thousands of dollars per year into it, tax-free. You can manage it yourself. You can buy and sell whatever you want to out of your own checkbook. And there's very minimal reporting requirements. The moment you have one employee, that thing becomes a nightmare. And because now you're regulated by employee benefit, I mean, there's just stacks and stacks and stacks of regulatory compliance that falls into that 401k plan that if you had no employees at all, you can run it out of your own checkbook. And so that's one of the reasons that people look at these independent structures is, hey, if I can independently retain instead of employ people to perform functions from their home and my company can still thrive, I can actually have an economic advantage because I don't have all this regulatory pressure that I have to deal with all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand that. I've spent a lot of time in China, and I've examined what it would take to set up a business in China. And if you compare China to, let's say, Oregon, the laws there and the regulations, China's much more open to business. If a person wants to start a business in China, they're like, what can we do to help you? Versus, okay, we're here to find out if there's anything we can. They strike me in America as being kind of like the butler who goes in and checks if the maids have dusted properly and, running their fingers on every conceivable surface to see if any dust still exists in the house or something. That seems to be what most bureaucrats do in America.
Yeah, well, I left Oregon. You and I both have roots there, and I left Oregon over a couple of primary reasons. And one of the big reasons was regulatory compliance. When I came to Arizona, oh my gosh, the difference are going to be more open today and in the future for considering, more off-site relationships with people providing services. And I just want to encourage, moms, that if they have a desire and they want to stay home, they want to spend time with their kids. And I'm not trying to, punish anybody who doesn't. But if that's their desire, then I've got 75 ways, and there's more, but I mentioned the 75 ways I thought were best for moms to be able to make significant income, not just pennies here and pennies there, and not things that require an extensive amount of time away from their family.
Okay. Hey, I just noticed. Okay, if people want your book, it's on Amazon. You can just type in Larry Farris or the name of the book. Do you have a website or anything?
I don't. I just put it on Amazon. And one of the things Amazon, in your first 90 days with Amazon, they don't want you promoting anywhere besides Amazon. And they give you a special consideration as an author if you do so. And so it kind of encourages many authors like myself, and that I'm working on about my fifth book right now, seventh. I'm working about my seventh book right now. So as you produce more books, it really becomes more of an incentive to stay with Amazon because of that they don't want a secondary promotion model.
Okay. Your 7 books? That's a lot. Any of them on politics?
No, not yet. I'm a little worried. I really am worried about the level of freedom in the United States, and I'm not sure it's really safe anymore to have a candid discussion about what the problems are and how to fix it.
Oh, I guess there's an advantage when you don't actually reside in the country anymore.
Right. No, Mike, we've been buddies for years, and I have great respect for the path you've walked, and it's not the U.S. that you remember. I mean, there's we could get into that other side, but the police state that's been created here is pretty intimidating to people who remember the good old days.
Yeah, I just noticed a picture of that shooting that took place in Oregon, and they had like dozens of students all lined up with their hands on their heads, and the way they were going over them, I mean, it's like now the police just round people up and, okay, assume position. I mean, seriously, that used to be a joke, that people would do.
I know.
About if the cops get you, it's like, assume the position. And now it's just like, snap the finger, Americans comply, get into the position.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, no, it's pretty scary.
Yeah, and, you don't see that kind of situation. I've talked to cops in Italy. I've had interactions with police, not in a negative way, but, in China, in Russia, various countries in Europe. And it seems that the police outside of America are more educated or professional, or at least there's a certain sense of boundaries. And it was that way up until like the early 2000s. And then suddenly now it's like there's people that don't even want to fly in. They'll pay extra to fly into Toronto for a transfer on a plane rather than having to transfer in America and have to go through all the security.
Yeah. It's pretty tough.
Yeah. So, wow. Okay. Well, we can talk about that later. That would be a really interesting subject because, I'd love to talk about what's going on in the Middle East right now. Maybe, it's a good idea to buy extra food and so forth and have it stored away. Maybe the Mormons are right after all, everyone. Anyway. So, okay. Well, Larry, nice talking with you. And I really, really, really do encourage people to check out the book. And I guess even if you're employed and you don't have kids, or with today's employment structures, you don't know. Tomorrow you could be replaced, and anything can happen to your corporation. So therefore, nowadays I think it's really important to diversify. Have more than one thing you're good at, because you don't want to be in a position where whatever you're good at no longer is needed. And I think you'd agree with that, right, Larry?
That's right. Oh, absolutely. And the reason I have 75 different business structures, different business ideas in my book is I don't expect somebody necessarily to do one. It may be that during for example, my wife is an amazing designer, custom clothing designer and seamstress and flat pattern designer and such. So she's got a lot of work to do during prom season, right up before the winter high school formals, and during the spring with weddings, but not a whole lot in the summer and not much in the fall and early winter period. And so if she were in a situation where she needed to make more income, she'd have to use 2 or 3 different ideas. She might be doing custom designs and alterations 4 months a year, but other periods of time she'd be working in, one of the things we do out of our home is payroll. And we help small businesses prepare and file their payroll. 3 months a year, I'm very active preparing small business and personal taxes. And so the idea is that if you think about 3 or 4 to maybe 2, 3 or 4 different business ideas that you can catch their highs. Every business has a season. And if you're in the season at the peak with each one of the business structures, you have a far better chance of serving a potential client better, of meeting a need better, and making better income while you're advancing your lifestyle. And it doesn't mean you have to stay at home either. I mean, our family, we got an RV and we traveled for 10 months in 2004, 2005. We traveled the entire country while we homeschooled our kids. And I was able to develop an income training and teaching along the way. So there's a lot of things, and we did that before. In 1997, we spent the entire winter in Mexico, in Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara, and I was able to make some income doing some business structures. And so it doesn't mean stay at home. It may be that you're just gathering your family together and making an income using 2 or 3 or 4 different strategies to pull the whole thing together. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Well, we're bucking the midpoint here, though. So again, everyone, check 75 proven ways to stay at home. Stay-at-home moms earn great income from Larry Farris. Okay, well, thank you very much, Larry.
Thanks, Mike. Have a good day.
You too. Bye now. We're going to do something a little bit different than usual. I had an interview on a radio show recently. The show, it's on psychopaths. I've put a couple articles on my website at michaelcross.net on this subject, as well as several other subjects dealing with society in general. Or check out my YouTube station at, Michael Cross. Is the Richie Allen show that comes out of England. And essentially what the main thrust is trying to find out exactly what constitutes psychopathic behavior, and then essentially some of the questions that surround that, such as societal control. Why is it, for instance, that psychopaths seem to do so well when it comes to climbing the corporate ladder, or
in their given professions? How come the light always shines on them? And what are the characteristics seem to assist that? Now, in fairness, I point out that not all psychopaths are evil. Okay, we've interviewed people dealing with this on this show, and the thing is, psychopathy refers to a way that someone looks at life, perhaps through a hyper-cognitive way of judging events and judging circumstances, maybe using a little bit less emotion or a lot less emotion, or sometimes even no emotion. And the thing is that I've pointed out numerous times, and I think a few people, at least in the comment section when we were doing the show, that a few people really mistake this for, in some ways, trying to make it sound as if, well, psychopaths are like a cool group of people. And I never say that. The thing is, what I point out is that I'm going to liken a psychopath to a Terminator from the series Terminator. And essentially, in the first Terminator movie, which was excellent, the Terminator was devoid of emotion and had a purpose. And that purpose was that he was going to kill Sarah Connor and prevent her from giving birth, kind of like a really early abortion in that sense, before she's even pregnant, and prevent her son from someday leading the resistance against the robots. Now, the second Terminator, it was essentially the same model. It was a Terminator, and it had a slightly different program to protect the son of this woman so that he could grow up and lead the rebellion against the robots. Now, in both cases, you had a psychopathic robot. But in one, the mission was to kill, and in the other one, it was to protect. And essentially, I know some people like to liken psychopaths to reptiles. And the thing is that in the reptile world, you take a look at, you try and mess with an alligator or crocodile's young until they reach, of course, a certain age. And that creature will go after you with everything it's got, or any other creature that tries to mess with them. You see, I think all animals actually have some sort of sense of maternity, or at least most of at least the higher organisms. And the thing is, can we say it's empathy? I don't know. In humans, we expect it to be empathy. We expect a human being to feel empathy, to feel guilt, to feel remorse, and not to analyze everything and come out with like a cost-benefit spreadsheet when it comes to basic morality and treatment of others. But there are people, psychopaths, who really lack that sense of empathy. They lack a sense of guilt. They are prone to boredom. They have a glorified sense of themselves as if they're the center of the universe. They have often a sense of wanting to have what's known as narcissistic supply, which means, most psychopaths don't lock themselves up in the corner like they're depicted on detective series and, never venture out unless it's to go prey on society. Most of them like attention. Most of them like the limelight because, I think everyone likes a little attention. But what if your personality required it? In a sense, like a vampire needs blood. Your personality desired to be able to take this. Now, the thing is, there are psychopaths who maybe they go into acting. Maybe they're your favorite actress is ultimately a psychopath, or a singer, or any number of other people. and, maybe some CEO and maybe your favorite politician. But ultimately, you have to make the determination, what ethics do they follow? And do they have a good track record of following those ethics? I guess the way I look at it is I look at almost all politicians as being psychopaths. Now, I know deep down that they're not. Not all of them are, although I do suspect that they score much higher on for instance, the hair checklist than the average person would. But the thing is that if I see that they have a track record where they follow what they say they follow, then I'm likely to say I'll support this person, regardless of their psychopathy, or even in some cases a narcissist. There's some politicians I look at and say, that's not a psychopath, that's a narcissist. Even though, in some ways, a narcissist is more dangerous than a psychopath, at least at the political level. But the thing is that, do we really have a lot of people who would score 5 or 6? And you just look it up. Look up the hair checklist of psychopathy. And ask yourself, would a person that scores a 5 or a 6 be able to make it in today's predatory political society? They may, I think the higher you go in politics, and I'm just going to center on politics, the more the psychopath is going to come out on top. You see, each level we go through, let's say you start out at the city council and then go on to be, a county commissioner. And then you go on maybe to be a state representative. And, someday you become a congressman. The thing is, each stage you went through is like going through a tournament on the Hunger Games. When you first start out, maybe the people you're going up against, at the city level are somewhat amateuristic. Okay, a lot of these people are motivated by some specific issue, like the zoning on their street, or something else that's really inconsequential in the long run. But ultimately, it's an easier fight to make it. But then as you go on, it's the prize is a little bit better. Maybe as a city councilman, you don't get any money, but as a county commissioner, you do. And then, of course, if you want some real power, get into the state legislature. You get money, and there's more power because the power is more concentrated. And then if you want to go into national politics, well, you've got your experience as a state legislature, so then you go on to the next round. So it's essentially, each round is a Hunger Games competition, or something akin to the Roman Colosseums. And since it is that way, you can expect these kinds of people come up on top. So ultimately, what I try in the interview that follows is to present the reasons why we need to keep an eye on politicians, but at the same time, why I think ultimately we're kind of destined to wind up with a lot of psychopathic people, or people that have very similar traits to the psychopath, gain in office. But but the ones that have no ethics, they're a dangerous breed. Remember, Terminator, first movie, you'd much rather have Terminator, second and third movie. Okay? The thing is that ultimately you've got to keep an eye on them. And remember, oh gosh, who said this? George Washington? I don't remember. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. May have been Thomas Jefferson. I think it was Thomas Jefferson. But ultimately, founding fathers realized that, power is attractive to people, and you have to balance those powers, and you can't just sit back and think someone else is going to, because as Plato said, if you leave politics up to someone else, that someone else is going to exercise power at your expense, ultimately. Anyway, hope you enjoy the interview. Take care. Bye now.
He's a psychologist. He's also an author, and he hosts the Unlock the Door radio show. We'll find out more about that in the next 40 minutes or thereabouts. And we're going to be talking, as I said, about psychopaths, but also much more besides. Check out his website. It's a fascinating website. It's michaelcross.net. That's michaelcross.net. He's very well known to a lot of people in the independent media. It's my first time chatting to him. I can't wait to do that. So let's welcome Michael Cross to the show. Michael, how are you?
Hey, very good. How are you doing, Richie?
I'm really well, and thanks very much for reaching out to me. I'm honoured that you did, because like I said, you've done a lot of really terrific stuff yourself, and as I said, you're well known in the independent media. So thanks for getting in touch, Michael, and your work is fascinating, and I can't wait to talk about it. Are you in Sweden right now?
Yeah, I'm an American, but I live in Sweden.
Right, so it's getting on there. It's getting kind of late. I was trying to figure out what time zone would you be in, but you're in Sweden, beautiful part of the world, Sweden, of course. And it really is great to chat with you. You've put some fabulous, interesting, insightful and thought-provoking articles on your site in the last few weeks about artificial intelligence, about psychopaths, and about consumerism. And I suppose we'll get into bits and pieces in the next 45 minutes or so. But I'll tell you what, Michael, you whetted even my appetite when you emailed me and you talked about psychopaths, what it means, how we came to define it, and what it really is. It's absolutely fascinating. What's a psychopath? What is it?
Well, a psychopath is generally, just to put it simply, it's a personality disorder, which basically means it's not a mental illness, despite what you might see in Hollywood, the way they might present someone in a crime drama as being a psychopath. It's not a mental illness. It's just that people that have certain traits that have been identified by psychologists such as Checkley back in the 40s, Robert Hare more recently, traits that put them kind of at the far end of the spectrum in the way that they see life and how their personality is set up. So, generally speaking, there's a criteria, a test that psychologists and criminologists and so forth will administer to people to see how far they score on this psychopathic checklist. And if they score at a certain level, depending on which country you're in, Britain has a different standard than Canada and America and so forth, then they'd be classified as psychopaths. But the one thing
you've seen the test, Michael.
Huh?
You've seen these tests or these assessments.
Yeah.
Look, this is fascinating. Give us an idea of the sort of questions that would be on a test or a questionnaire like that.
Okay, well, just to summarize them to a certain degree, you would have tests that would, first of all, they'd ask the question, is this a trait that defines you? Okay, before I go into the traits. Is this a trait that is just, well, that, is that Richie or is that Mike? If you're given the question. And then there's the rating where you might say, well, that seems to be the way I am a lot, but I don't really define myself that way. I just seem to be more that way than others. And then, of course, there's well, that really does not describe me. I may do this once in a while, but not very often. And so, just simply, you might score a 0 if you had the latter, and then a 1 if it's a lot of times, and if it's just you in a nutshell, then that could be a 2. Now, of course, if you take these kinds of tests on the internet, which there are out there, don't go to Facebook and those kinds of tests. What's your favorite color and what's your favorite band for a psychopathic test. People have put lots of stuff out there. But you can find the questions fairly easy if you also include Checkley or Hare's name in your search. But anyway, I'll give you a couple of the questions. I mean, it could be, do you have glib and superficial charm? Meaning it's something that you could turn on and turn off depending on the situation. You might go to a party if you're a psychopath, and you may have no interest in those people whatsoever, and then someone says, oh, by the way, that person over there is the CEO of the company you're interested in applying for. And then you could go over and smooth talk him or her, and act like you're their best buddy.
Okay. Is that not ambition, though?
Well, the thing is, though, yes, a lot of these traits may sound like ambition.
Yeah.
We get into the idea that this is the way you are. And other things fit into this, too. So it's not just if you're just charming. Yeah. I mean, there's people that are charming that are far from being psychopathic. But there's the other traits that cluster in it. And that's, for instance, you get things like grandiose self-worth. Often in America, you get politicians that when they're running for president, they'll come out that, well, he wanted to be president since he was 6 years old. Those
yeah. Who wants to be president? Yeah, from the time they're 6. But I'm sure some have.
Yeah.
Some people have had those ideas.
Oh, of course. And also you may feel like you're kind of the center of the universe, which can be actually an advantage in some ways, because if you walk into, like I said, the hypothetical party, and you just sit in the corner, well, then you're not going to get noticed. But if all of a sudden you know how to get the attention around you, well, that attracts people saying, well, he seems to be ambitious. Maybe women are like, wow, this guy is, he seems to have something going for him. And of course, that's very attractive to the opposite sex. And then you get into such things as, they tend to be very, susceptible to boredom. They don't like the mundane. They don't like doing the same thing over and over. And it might be because of serotonin levels in their brain. That's been speculation. No one really knows for sure.
Yeah.
But something that might excite you or 95% of the rest of the population may take a little bit more for them to get excited. So this could explain, for instance, why it seems so many members of the British Parliament and U.S. Congress and even former presidents, you think, well, people are watching them, but yet they're involved in these horrendous sex scandals. Well, it's really not that they were just being clumsy. It's because it's a thrill for a lot of politicians, because politicians are more, they're more likely to be psychopath. I'm not saying the majority, but they're more likely to have the traits.
Can you add into that? Because this is really interesting now. Can you also add to that then the previous trait you mentioned, that grandiose self-worth idea that I'm really, really important? Does that factor into the tendency to do nasty things to children and to other men and women because of the fact that you can, or because of the fact that they think, well, I can do whatever I want because of who I am?
Yeah, you can get entitlement. Of course, you can get entitlement with people that aren't psychopathic, but with psychopaths, there's a certain sense of narcissism. I interviewed one guy that was an expert on my radio show, and he said that, for instance, when it comes to sexuality and relationships, the psychopath, it's not so much that they're making love with their partner, is that they are treating their partner to themselves.
Right.
So they have sort of this sense that they're sort of like a gift to mankind. And when you have that kind of entitlement feeling, then it can lead to really manipulating people and hurting people, because ultimately you don't see your actions as being in the same realm as just the way the average person is. I'll say this one thing. They tend to not conform to societal norms, which actually can lead sometimes to heroic behavior. They may do things that we later say, wow, this politician or just this guy that ran out in the street and saved this lady from a burning car. Very heroic, but at the same time, when everyone else is just standing around doing nothing, it could be that they have high levels of psychopathy because they're like, hey, I don't care. I'm just going to go out there and do it. Or it could be for the reward, like, now I'm going to get in the newspaper for this. Yeah. But nevertheless, that's one of the things that tends to complicate the issue, because sometimes on alternative media we talk about, they're evil, they're in politics, they're CEOs of corporations, they're this, and this. But in some respects, then when you look at the checklist for which presidents of the United States, for instance, rate high in psychopathy, you find some of the ones that are the most popular, like JFK and Ronald Reagan. You're like, well, no, they were nice. Well, it didn't mean they had to be evil. It just meant that they were very driven, and they may have scored very high when psychologists and historians will look at these traits. Of course.
Now, Michael, this is where we get to the definition of psychopath that most of us, and I include me, I don't include you because you're obviously you've looked into this and you've researched and read and written so much about it. But this is where some of our listeners now, they'll say, oh Jesus, Michael has mentioned JFK. JFK was a good guy. what Michael is saying is, and it's important, the definition that we have of a psychopath, if I was to get 100 listeners and say psychopath, they might think Jeffrey Dahmer. They might think Hannibal Lecter, or any other serial killer that you can think of. That's what we think of, Michael, because that's what the media tells us a psychopath is. But what you're saying is, as disturbing and as maybe, not normal these traits are, you can be a psychopath and not cause anybody any physical harm. You can live your life with this condition and not be a danger to society.
Oh, absolutely. It's just that you could, an apology to dog lovers out there that may own these dogs, but it's like a Rottweiler. I mean, a Rottweiler can be the most gentle dog ever, but if under the right situations, it can be extremely vicious. And I think psychopaths can fall under that same category that, they can be, like in politics, they're very Machiavellian. I mean, if getting your way by being nice will get your way, then you do it. If you have to crack a few eggs to do it, then, as Lenin would say, you have to do that too. But there is the aspect of fearless dominance. And, you mentioned Hannibal Lecter. And everyone can the psychopath's he's a medical doctor, but he eats people. Another fictional character that falls under psychopathy would be James Bond. And, most people are like, well, no, he's the good guy. Yeah, but take a look at his traits. I mean, if you especially look at the older James Bond films, when he kills people in very hideous ways.
Because he's government told him to, and he doesn't question the orders, or is it right to do that to that person? Do they have a family? Yeah.
But he also...
I understand that, Michael, yeah.
But especially when Sean Connery was the James Bond, he'd always have this little glib joke, when he, pushed the button that blew up the place. It was like, he'd have some joke about, or he's killed someone, the girl says, well, where is he? Well, he kind of fell apart.
That's right, and we saw that in the 1980s thrillers with Schwarzenegger and Stallone. They always had a funny gag after they tossed somebody off a cliff or something.
Yeah.
I had to let him go and all of that sort of stuff.
And that is where you may have the fearless dominance that sometimes you get the anti-hero. It's like the character in my book series. I do a fictional book series. The fourth one's coming out here very soon, the Freedom from Conscience series. And in it, it's a female psychopath, but she's the hero. It's just you get a sense of how she thinks because it's a narrative. Very similar, I guess the closest thing I can come to that is like when, Clockwork Orange, you're seeing the world through Alex's eyes.
Yeah.
And this one you see the world through Melanie's eyes. And the thing is that I've had people that have read the book and say, hey, is there something wrong with me? I actually totally fell in love with this character. I had a girl actually say, gosh, I'm not a lesbian, but if I met her, I'd date her, and I'm saying, well, this is the way psychopathy works.
Do you know what? This is the truth. I never tell lies. I'm not going to say I've read the Freedom from Conscience series. I haven't. But watching you coming on the program, Michael's books have been really, really well reviewed. And you can find links to them on michaelcross.net. And this character that you write about does sound absolutely fascinating. I want to just briefly pause because I've had quite a few emails and tweets, Michael, so I just want to read a couple of them out.
Okay.
Because this is fascinating, people. And of course, we're going to get to the big question now in a minute, which is how are people with psychopathic tendencies or traits getting to the top positions in the important jobs, whether it be politics or whether it be industry. We will, of course, talk to Michael about that and what it means for the rest of us. We'll get to that in a second. Karen was on to say, Michael said something very interesting, which is that the tests are different in every country. How is that, Michael? Can you explain why? Surely people are people, irrespective of where they come from.
Well, in a lot of psychology, even though we have the DSM, which is kind of vague, I mean, they have antisocial personality disorder, and there's some psychologists that feel that psychopathy should be the way we see personality, whereas there's others that say it has to have a behavioral component. So I fall into that category that says that it should be seen as a personality. In other words, many psychopaths have never broken the law. but yet there is this tendency to think, well, no, they should, one of the criteria for antisocial personality disorder is that they, get in trouble. Well, it's not necessarily the case. I think another fictional example, if I could think of it, House of Cards.
Right, the Kevin Spacey thing. Yeah.
He fits it too. That same kind of Machiavellian, I'm going to go for my goal and so forth. But now here's the thing, just like with, if you go to one country like France, for instance, they don't see ADHD as being something that really is a disorder. They see it as more of okay, well, you've got some behaviors we need to modify. Whereas,
do you think it's a disorder, Mike?
Huh?
Do you think ADHD is a genuine disorder? Because I've got very serious doubts about the way Big Pharma invent illnesses to sell medication for. I mean, we all knew children in school that were daydreamers and didn't really pay attention, but giving them drugs is something I've got a problem with. But we don't need to get into that. But do you think it's a real disorder?
Personally, not the way that it's defined. I think it would be like saying that a person with red hair and blue eyes has a disorder because they're more susceptible to catching skin cancer if they're in the sun. I mean, it's skin tone, it runs the spectrum. You get people that are very, very light. Someone with red hair in Ireland is going to be more susceptible to getting skin cancer than someone who's black and lives in Nigeria.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean the redhead has a disorder. It just means that they're different. And I think that's the way with ADHD too. But in America, oh my gosh, some little boy throws a piece of paper at someone trying to get their attention, and all of a sudden he's down in the counselor's office and getting a medical referral, and some doctor that has 60 patients that day is just like...
Do you know what's tragic, Michael? Do you know what's tragic? These days they're getting arrested. We've seen examples of them being handcuffed. And I tell you what, Michael, you will not be surprised by this. I'm loving this chat. It's really great to have Michael Cross on the program. I've had only a dozen emails asking you about behaviours within police officers and policemen and women. And if you want to get into that in a minute, you can. But let me read out a couple of more tweets. JP asks, haven't we all got traits? And you can answer that in a second if you want. It's a good question. Philip was on to say, what's the difference between a psychopath and somebody with an antisocial personality disorder? So those are two questions. And Karen, how are you, Karen? Are these tendencies hereditary? Which is a brilliant question. Michael, we really could have done a longer show than this. There's so much coming in.
I can come back later.
Of course you can come back. We'll definitely have you back. This is marvellous. Now, Philip says, what's the difference between a psychopath and an antisocial personality disorder?
Well, it's kind of like what I said. It's more of a definition. Yeah. One is looking more at behaviors. The other one's looking more at a personality itself. So I guess one is the way you look at the world, would be more psychopathic, and also it's seen more in the sense of it being related to genetics. There's been a big controversy over the issue of what's a sociopath, for instance, and a psychopath. And ultimately, when you get right down to it, I've interviewed psychologists on this on my radio show, and the consensus is there's really no such thing as a sociopath. It is a psychopath. It's just that during the days of B.F. Skinner, when it was very politically incorrect to say someone was born with a trait, they came up with the idea of sociopaths, meaning that you became this way because of your environment. I personally believe that it is a combination of environment and genetics, but the environment will cause you to express the trait differently. For instance, I talked to James Fallon. You ever hear of him? Not the comedian, but the neurosurgeon.
No, I haven't. I can't say I have one.
Okay, he's a professor in neurology, and I can't remember which California university, but he was doing brain scans of serial killers. And there was also a test being done on Alzheimer's. And so he volunteered his family and himself to get brain scans so they could be like control subjects, so they could be for the Alzheimer's. And he was looking through the brain scans, and he found one brain scan that he was like, no, this is one of my serial killers. This is not my, one of the controls. And then he found out that, no, that was his brain.
It was his own brain.
And
it was very similar to the serial killer. That's incredible.
Yeah, and then he told me that what happened was if you check my YouTube station, the interview's there. And he went to his friends, colleagues, people that had known him all of his life, his family, and said, "Can you believe?
Am I okay?"
They said I'm a psychopath, and they're going, the indication he gave was kind of like, yeah. They were like, I can see that. And, there's probably people out there right now who may be listening that are like, oh yeah, psychopaths. And then they take the test and they're like, oh my gosh, I scored a 25 on this. What am I doing?
So that goes back to JP's question asking, do we all have one or more traits associated with psychopathy? Do we?
Yeah, we do. But I've administered this to students, for years. And the average is like on these tests, the good ones, you'll get, and of course you can't really do this in a testing situation. I mean, the people that are experts in this will then go through a battery of additional tests and see how those cluster in the different realms. But usually most people get about a 4 or a 5 when they're taking the test, because there's a couple of the traits, maybe, they kind of feel that they've always thought of themselves like a princess or something, and so they'll score a 2 on the grandiose thing, but then the rest of them, no, I'm nice, I have empathy. That's a big trait there. That's a big defining trait. Psychopaths can have sympathy, but not empathy, usually.
Of course, there's a massive difference. A lot of people don't understand. There's a massive difference. Gotta say this before I mention some more comments. I had a difficult time as a kid and went through a series of counsellors that weren't any good, and met a counsellor called Tony, who was magnificent. He was a great guy. Challenged me, Michael, gave me a right good beating, to face up to the things that had happened to me. He was a lovely guy, Tony. And for a long time I kept in touch with Tony, And as a proper clinician or physician, privacy, of course, and ethics were sacrosanct to him, and he would never tell any stories about anybody particularly. But he did say something that scared me. He said, Richie, I'll tell you what, he said, I see a lot of sociopaths. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, of course, I'm not going to do him any justice now by explaining this properly, but he said to me, Richie, I meet a lot of people who genuinely believe that and you touched on this earlier, Michael, that they are the only person in the world, and that everybody else is not really real. And that scared the bejesus out of me, Michael. And I said, seriously, Tony? And he said, yeah, I meet a lot of people who admit to wondering a lot, are they the only person in the world? And is everybody else a mirage or, something different? And I thought, that's not a healthy way to be thinking, really. And he said, yeah, but I see a lot of that. And of course, he didn't elaborate much on it. Does that make any sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. Now, I have no proof whatsoever, about Edward Bernays. He was the nephew, for listeners don't know, he was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, who, when he found out what Sigmund Freud, his uncle, had written about how the human brain works on the subconscious level, he decided, hey, I can make money off this. And, of course, he became the father of advertising in the 20th century and, again, in the 21st century. But the thing is, I've read about him where basically he didn't do so well one-on-one with people, but groups. He saw people as groups. And that gave him an ability to be an incredible marketer. He knew how to sell a concept to 1 million people. He could twist them around, get them doing, he's like the founder of much of what we eat for breakfast, because he was working with companies that were like, well, how do we get people to eat more eggs or bacon or something like that for breakfast?
Right.
And he knew how to do it. He worked with companies that meant fantastic campaign to get women to smoke, and sold it on the idea of feminism. Ultimately, torches of freedom.
And it worked.
Yeah, and it did work. And I can't help but think that he would have to score high on the psychopathy. I mean, I don't know, but I would speculate that he would, because this is the way a psychopath would see the world.
Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.